The scent of seared bulgogi and whispered conversations filled Hannah Garden as evening shadows stretched across polished hardwood floors. Zara Williams balanced 3 plates of banchan along her left arm while navigating between tables with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to move silently through far more dangerous terrain than an upscale Korean restaurant. 6 months of serving Seattle's elite had taught her that wealth spoke in hushed tones and expected perfection without acknowledgement. The man at table 12 commanded attention without demanding it. Kim Jae-hyun sat with his back to the wall, dark eyes scanning the dining room with the methodical precision of someone who had survived too many attempts on his life to ever fully relax. His charcoal suit was tailored with the kind of attention that cost more than most people earned in a year. When he lifted his chopsticks, the platinum signet ring on his finger caught the ambient light. Zara had served powerful men before, but this one carried danger like expensive cologne. Subtle, intoxicating, lethal. I wonder where you're watching this from tonight. Are you somewhere safe, somewhere peaceful, or do you understand the weight of always watching your surroundings like these characters do? Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. She approached his table with professional distance intact, setting down the last course with movements that never quite turned her back to the dining room entrance. Old habits died hard, and some instincts were worth keeping alive. You requested the chef's selection, she said, her voice steady and warm. The galbi was prepared tableside to your specifications. Jae-hyun's gaze lifted to her face, and for a moment, something shifted behind those calculating eyes. Most people looked through service staff like they were furniture. This man saw her, really saw her. The recognition was unsettling. Thank you, he replied in accented English that spoke of expensive education and international business. His voice carried the kind of controlled authority that made grown men step aside in hallways. Zara nodded and turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. You move like someone with training. The observation was delivered casually, but she caught the underlying assessment. Her shoulders tensed for a fraction of a second before professional composure reasserted itself. I've worked in hospitality for years, she answered, neither confirming nor denying what he'd noticed. Jae-hyun's slight smile suggested he wasn't fooled, but he didn't press the issue. He simply returned to his meal, though she felt his attention like a physical weight as she walked away. The restaurant hummed with its usual evening energy. Couples shared intimate conversations over candlelight. Business associates conducted negotiations between courses. The kitchen staff moved with choreographed efficiency beyond the swinging doors. Everything was exactly as it should be, until it wasn't. The first man entered through the main door at 8:47. Zara noticed him because his scan of the room was too thorough, too tactical. The second and third came through the side entrance 30 seconds later. The fourth slipped in through the kitchen. The fifth took position near the restrooms. Professional, coordinated, armed. Her blood turned to ice water as recognition flooded her system. This wasn't a robbery. This was an execution. The lead man moved toward table 12 with purpose while his associates took strategic positions. Jae-hyun continued eating, but his posture had shifted almost imperceptibly. He knew they were coming. Time crystallized into perfect clarity. The assassin's hand moved toward his jacket. Zara's body reacted before her mind finished processing the threat. 3 years of Army Rangers training and 2 deployments worth of split-second life-and-death decisions took control. She dropped the water pitcher she was carrying and stepped directly into the gunman's line of sight. The crash of breaking glass provided perfect cover as her elbow drove into his solar plexus with enough force to double him over. His weapon clattered to the floor as she grabbed his wrist and twisted until bones snapped. The dining room erupted into screaming chaos. The second assassin swung toward her, raising his pistol, but Zara was already moving. She pivoted low, sweeping his legs while simultaneously driving her palm into his throat. The wet crack of cartilage collapsing was lost in the sound of chairs scraping and people diving for cover. Get down, she shouted to Jae-hyun, but when she glanced his direction, he was calmly reaching inside his jacket. Not for protection, for his own weapon. The third gunman had a clear shot at the Korean boss, but Zara intercepted the bullet's path by launching herself across the table. The slug meant for Jaehyun's chest caught her in the shoulder instead, spinning her around and sending her crashing into the wall. Pain exploded through her arm, but adrenaline kept her moving. She rolled behind an overturned table as the fourth assassin appeared from the kitchen, automatic weapon raised. Jaehyun's pistol barked twice. Clean, precise, professional. The kitchen gunman dropped instantly. The fifth man had flanked around during the chaos and now had a clear angle on both of them. Zara saw the threat developing and reacted without thinking. She grabbed a steak knife from the scattered table setting and sent it flying end over end across 15 feet of space. The blade took him in the throat before he could fire. Silence descended like a curtain. 5 bodies. 30 seconds of violence. A dining room full of witnesses who had just watched their waitress kill 3 trained assassins while protecting a man who had calmly executed 2 others. Zara slumped against the wall, clutching her wounded shoulder as blood seeped between her fingers. The professional mask she'd worn for months had shattered completely, revealing something far more dangerous underneath. Jaehyun approached slowly, his weapon lowered but ready. His dark eyes swept the carnage before settling on her face with newfound interest and unmistakable recognition. Former military, he stated. It wasn't a question. Army Rangers, she admitted, seeing no point in maintaining the charade. Her voice was steady despite the pain radiating through her shoulder. 82nd Airborne. 3 tours overseas. His gaze moved to her bleeding arm, then back to her face. Something had shifted in his expression. The careful distance of a customer evaluating service had been replaced by the focused attention of a predator recognizing an equal. "You saved my life," he said simply. "You were handling yourself just fine," Zara replied, wincing as she tried to stanch the bleeding. The distant sound of sirens grew louder, but Jaehyun didn't seem concerned. He holstered his weapon and pulled out his phone, speaking rapid Korean to whoever answered. Commands. Instructions. The kind of authority that made problems disappear. When he finished the call, he looked at her again with calculation that made her deeply uneasy. "The police will ask questions," he said. "Many questions. About the attackers. About why you knew how to fight like that. About why a waitress carries herself like a soldier." Zara felt the walls closing in. Her carefully constructed new life was crumbling around the edges, and this dangerous man was the reason why. "I just reacted," she said weakly. Jaehyun's smile was sharp as a blade and twice as dangerous. "No," he replied, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "You saved me because you couldn't help yourself. Because leaving someone defenseless goes against everything you are. Which means, Ms. Williams, that you and I have a great deal to discuss." The sirens were very close now. Red and blue lights painted the restaurant windows in alternating colors of emergency and consequence. Zara realized with sinking certainty that her quiet life had just ended, and the man standing over her held all the cards for whatever came next. His presence filled the space between them like a physical force, and for the first time since leaving the military, she found herself completely uncertain about the future. The only thing she knew for certain was that Kim Jae-hyun was the most dangerous man she'd ever encountered. And somehow, inexplicably, he felt like the safest place in the room. The private medical clinic smelled of antiseptic and money. Zara sat on the examination table, while a surgeon who probably earned more in a day than she made in a month carefully stitched her shoulder wound. The bullet had passed cleanly through muscle, missing bone and major arteries by millimeters. "You were fortunate," the doctor murmured in accented English, his hands steady as he worked. "Another inch to the right, and we would be having a very different conversation." Zara said nothing. Fortune had nothing to do with it. She had calculated the angle, positioned herself to take the least damaging hit while still protecting her target. 3 years of combat medicine training had taught her exactly where she could afford to be shot. The clinic was too expensive, too private, too clean. Normal people with gunshot wounds went to emergency rooms where they filled out insurance forms and answered police questions. This place operated in the shadows where money bought silence and discretion came standard. Kim Jae-hyun stood near the window, speaking in rapid Korean to two men in dark suits. His voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. Whatever he was saying, his subordinates listened with the focused attention of soldiers receiving orders. When the doctor finished bandaging her shoulder, Jae-hyun dismissed him with a nod. The surgeon gathered his instruments and left without a word, closing the door behind him with a soft click of expensive hinges. The two men in suits stepped forward. The taller one had the build of a boxer and eyes that had seen too much violence. His partner was smaller, but moved with the liquid grace of someone who specialized in making problems disappear quietly. "These are my associates," Jae-hyun said, settling into the chair across from her with controlled elegance. "Mr. Park will be asking you some questions." The tall man opened a tablet and fixed her with a stare that could strip paint from metal. "Real name Zara Williams," he began, his English heavily accented but precise. "Born Detroit, Michigan. Father deceased. Mother remarried and relocated to Phoenix. One younger brother, Marcus Williams, age 19, currently enrolled at University of Washington studying pre-med." Zara kept her expression neutral, but ice formed in her stomach. They had done their homework fast. Too fast. "Military service," Park continued, swiping to the next screen. "Enlisted at 18. Army Rangers, 82nd Airborne Division. 3 deployments. Afghanistan, Iraq, classified location in Southeast Asia. Specialized training in close quarters combat, tactical reconnaissance, and high-value target protection." He paused, studying her reaction. "Honorable discharge 3 years ago following an incident in Kandahar province. Official records sealed. Subsequent employment history includes private security, personal protection, and finally food service in Seattle." The sanitized version of her military career sounded almost respectable. The reality had been far messier. Blood and sand, and impossible choices that left scars on more than just flesh. Jae-hyun leaned forward slightly, his dark gaze never leaving her face. "The sealed records," he said quietly. "What really happened in Kandahar?" Zara met his stare without flinching. "Some stories weren't for telling, especially not to men who collected information like weapons." "That's classified," she replied evenly. The smaller man, whom Jae-hyun hadn't bothered to name, stepped closer to the examination table. His movement was casual, almost lazy, but Zara recognized the positioning of a predator testing boundaries. "Perhaps we can help clarify your memory," he suggested, his voice silk over steel. Zara shifted slightly on the table, despite the pulling sensation in her wounded shoulder. Her body language remained relaxed, but her weight balanced for rapid movement. "You could try," she said simply. The room went very still. Both men looked to Jae-hyun, waiting for direction. The Korean boss studied Zara with renewed interest, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "Enough," he commanded softly. Ms. Williams protected civilians caught in crossfire when her commanding officers ordered her to stand down. She was court-martialed for insubordination and subsequently cleared of all charges when the incident was investigated. The discharge was voluntary. Zara blinked, genuinely surprised. Those records were buried so deep that even she wasn't sure anyone remembered the truth. "How do you know that?" she asked. Jae-hyun's smile held no warmth. "I know many things, Ms. Williams. For instance, I know that you moved to Seattle specifically to be near your brother while he receives treatment for acute lymphoblastic leukemia. I know that his medical bills have exhausted your family's resources. I know that you took a job as a waitress because the flexible schedule allowed you to attend his chemotherapy appointments." The ice in her stomach spread to her chest. "Marcus." They knew about Marcus. "What do you want?" she said, dropping all pretense of cooperation. "What I want," Jae-hyun replied, rising from his chair with fluid grace, "is very simple. Tonight, you became a target. The men who tried to kill me were professionals. They will have backup plans, alternative approaches, and they will have noticed that their operation was compromised by an unexpected variable. Namely you. He began pacing, his movements controlled and predatory. They will investigate. They will discover that their carefully planned assassination was thwarted by a former Army Ranger with specialized combat training. They will realize that you can identify their methods, their equipment, possibly even their organization, which makes you a liability that must be eliminated. Zara felt the trap closing around her like a steel cage. You're saying they'll come after me. I'm saying they're probably already looking, Jae-hyun confirmed. Professional killers don't leave loose ends. Your brother, your friends, anyone connected to you becomes a potential target or source of leverage. The examination room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing inward with the weight of consequence. She had saved one man's life, and in doing so, signed death warrants for everyone she cared about. What are you proposing? She asked, though she suspected she already knew. Protection, he said simply. For you and your brother. Comprehensive security, medical care, financial support. Everything you need to ensure your safety and his continued treatment. And in exchange, you remain close to me. Under my protection. Available when I need someone with your particular skill set. The words were carefully chosen, diplomatically phrased, but the meaning was crystal clear. He was offering to cage her in gold, and the key would remain firmly in his possession. You're talking about making me a prisoner, she said flatly. I'm talking about keeping you alive, he countered. And your brother. Her phone buzzed against the examination table. A text message from Marcus appeared on the screen, visible to everyone in the room. Hey sis, something weird happened at the hospital today. Security guards showed up asking questions about you. Everything okay? Jae-hyun didn't need to say anything. The message spoke for itself. The hunters were already circling. Your brother's next treatment is scheduled for tomorrow morning, he said quietly. Swedish Medical Center, Oncology Wing, 9 a.m. appointment with Dr. Sarachan. Room 412. He usually takes the bus, arrives early, waits in the lobby reading medical journals because he can't afford the parking fees. Each detail was a knife twist, demonstrating exactly how vulnerable Marcus really was. 24-hour protection detail, Jae-hyun continued. Private medical care with the best oncologists in the country. Experimental treatments if needed. Complete financial support for his education and your living expenses. It was everything she had been struggling to provide, wrapped in velvet chains. And if I refuse, then you walk out of here and hope you can protect him better than I can, he replied with brutal honesty. How long do you think you'll last against professional assassins while working double shifts at a restaurant? Zara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices. Every path led through darkness, but only one offered light at the end. What exactly would you expect from me? She asked finally. Security consultation. Personal protection when needed. Your expertise in tactical situations. Think of it as private military contracting with comprehensive benefits. When she opened her eyes, Jae-hyun was watching her with the patience of a man who already knew her answer. I won't be anyone's property, she said firmly. I'll need autonomy, respect, and the right to leave if the situation becomes unacceptable. Agreed, he replied immediately. I want my brother completely insulated from this world. He doesn't know what you do, and I want it to stay that way. Also agreed, and I want to know exactly what I'm getting involved with. No surprises, no hidden agendas. Jae-hyun's smile was sharp as broken glass. Ms. Williams, I run the most successful import-export business on the West Coast. We specialize in luxury goods, fine art, and cultural artifacts. Occasionally, our business practices attract the attention of less scrupulous competitors. Tonight's incident was simply corporate rivalry taken too far. It was smoothly delivered, probably the same explanation he gave to lawyers and federal investigators. Zara didn't believe a word of it, but she understood the game being played. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Swedish Medical Center. Marcus's name appeared on the caller ID. Answer it, Jae-hyun suggested gently. Speakerphone. She accepted the call with trembling fingers. Zara. Marcus's voice was tight, with barely controlled panic. Something's wrong. The hospital called, and said my treatment tomorrow has been moved to a private facility. They're sending a car to pick me up. This doesn't feel right. It's okay, baby brother, she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her chest. I'll explain everything when I see you. She ended the call and looked directly at Jaehyun. When do we start? She asked. His smile held genuine warmth for the first time since they'd met. Welcome to the family, Ms. Williams. Someone will be by to collect your belongings within the hour. Your brother's new treatment facility is the best in the Pacific Northwest, and his transportation will be provided by my most trusted men. As she slid down from the examination table, testing her wounded shoulder, Zara realized that her life had just been completely rewritten. She was no longer a waitress struggling to make ends meet. She was something far more dangerous. She was Kim Jae-hyun's asset, his weapon, his responsibility. And God help her, but part of her was relieved to finally stop pretending to be something she wasn't. The compound sprawled across 12 acres of secluded waterfront property, hidden behind high walls and sophisticated security systems that made Fort Knox look casual. Zara stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her assigned suite, watching morning mist roll across Elliott Bay while trying to reconcile her new reality with a life she'd abandoned less than 24 hours ago. Her belongings had arrived precisely when Jaehyun promised. Not just her sparse possessions from the studio apartment she could barely afford, but also items she hadn't seen in years. Her military commendations, carefully preserved in their original frames. Photographs from deployments that she'd thought were lost. Personal effects that someone had retrieved from storage units she'd forgotten she'd rented. The man was thorough to a degree that bordered on omniscience. A soft knock interrupted her brooding. She turned to find a young Korean woman in an immaculate black suit standing in the doorway, holding a breakfast tray that probably cost more than Zara's former monthly rent. Good morning, Miss Williams, the woman said in lightly accented English. I am Sun-hee, Mr. Kim's personal assistant. He requests your presence in the security briefing room at your convenience. Thank you, Zara replied, accepting the tray. The coffee smelled like heaven, and the pastries looked imported from somewhere expensive. When is he expecting me? He said to tell you whenever you're ready. Sun-hee answered with a slight smile. He also mentioned that your brother's first treatment at the new facility went very well yesterday. Dr. Patel was impressed with his progress. The casual mention of Marcus made Zara's chest tighten. Even absent, Jaehyun's presence loomed through every conversation, every gesture, every carefully orchestrated detail of her captivity. 15 minutes later, she found herself in a room that looked like NASA Mission Control had been redesigned by someone with unlimited funding and exquisite taste. Wall-mounted monitors displayed security feeds from dozens of locations around the city. Digital maps tracked movement patterns. Computer terminals hummed with encrypted communications. Jaehyun stood at the central console, wearing dark slacks and a white dress shirt that emphasized the lean strength of his frame. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms that belonged on a man who did more than sign documents and attend board meetings. Good morning, he said without turning around. Did you sleep well? As well as anyone can in a gilded cage, she replied. He glanced over his shoulder, and she caught a flicker of amusement in his dark eyes. The cage comes with a world-class medical facility, a private chef, and a library that would make most universities envious. Not to mention complete security for you and your brother. She moved to stand beside him at the console, studying the displays with professional interest. The setup was military-grade, possibly beyond what most government agencies could afford. This is impressive, she admitted. What exactly am I looking at? Last night's intelligence gathered on the organization that sent those assassins, he replied, pulling up a series of photographs. We've identified 3 of the 5 men who attacked the restaurant. All former Spetsnaz, all working for a private military contractor based out of Vancouver. The photos showed hard faces and dead eyes. Men who killed for money and slept soundly afterward. Someone paid a lot of money for a very public execution, Zara observed. This wasn't just about eliminating you. This was about sending a message. Jaehyun nodded approvingly. Exactly. which means our enemies are growing desperate. They're willing to risk exposure to make their point. Your tactical assessment. Zara studied the security feeds, her mind automatically cataloging vulnerabilities and defensive positions. Years of training kicked in as she analyzed sightlines, choke points, and potential approaches. Your perimeter security is excellent, but you're vulnerable during transport. Too many variables when you're mobile. Also, the restaurant attack suggests they have intelligence on your daily routines. Someone's been watching you for weeks, maybe months. She pointed to one of the monitors showing a convoy of black SUVs. Those vehicles scream high-value target. You might as well paint bullseyes on the sides. If I were planning an attack, I'd hit you during a scheduled movement when I knew exactly which route you'd take. Jaehyun was quiet for a long moment, processing her analysis. What would you recommend? Vary your patterns completely. Use decoy vehicles. Change routes randomly. Better yet, don't travel unless absolutely necessary. Make them come to you where you control every variable. She traced movement patterns on the digital map with her finger. Also, this security model assumes your enemies are external. But the leak that gave them your restaurant reservation had to come from inside your organization. You have a trust problem, not just a security problem. When she looked up, Jaehyun was watching her with an intensity that made her skin warm. Impressive, he said quietly. Most security consultants focus on technology and manpower. You see the human element. People are always the weakest link, she replied. No system is stronger than the person operating it. He moved closer, close enough that she caught the subtle scent of sandalwood and expensive soap that seemed to follow him everywhere. There's something I want to show you, he said. The elevator descended far below ground level, opening into a medical facility that belonged in a high-end hospital. Through reinforced glass windows, she could see Marcus sitting up in bed, laughing at something Dr. Patel was explaining while gesturing at his latest test results. His color was better. The hollow look around his eyes had started to fill in. For the first time in months, her baby brother looked like he might actually survive. The experimental treatment protocol is showing remarkable results, Jaehyun said softly. Dr. Patel believes we caught the progression early enough to achieve complete remission. Zara pressed her palm against the glass, watching Marcus's animated conversation with the doctor. The relief was so profound it made her knees weak. Why, she whispered. Why go this far for someone you don't even know? Because you saved my life, he replied simply. And because watching you worry about him was difficult to observe. She turned to find him standing closer than she'd realized, close enough to see gold flecks in his dark eyes. You don't strike me as someone who's easily moved by other people's problems, she said. Normally, no, he admitted. But you're not other people, are you, Zara Williams? The sound of her name and his voice sent an unexpected shiver through her. When had he stopped calling her Ms. Williams? When had his presence started feeling less like a threat and more like something else entirely? We should return upstairs, he said after a moment, stepping back to put safe distance between them. I have something else to discuss with you. Back in the security room, he pulled up building schematics on the main screen. I'm hosting a business dinner tomorrow night. Potential partners from Hong Kong, very lucrative arrangement if negotiations go well. But given recent events, I need someone I trust watching for threats. A babysitting job, she said flatly. A professional consultation, he corrected. You'll attend as my security advisor. Full access to communication systems, authority to override any security decision if you identify a threat. It was more responsibility than she'd expected, more trust than she'd thought possible from someone in his position. What makes you think I won't sell you out to the highest bidder? She asked. His smile was sharp but not unkind. Because you're not that kind of person. Because you see protecting people as a duty, not a transaction. And because your brother's continued health depends on my continued breathing. The last part was delivered without malice, simply a statement of fact that they both understood. Also, he added, moving to pour himself coffee from an elegant service set that probably cost more than her old car, I pay better than my enemies do. That evening, she found herself sharing dinner with him in a private dining room that overlooked the sound. The meal was Korean comfort food, served family style with an intimacy that felt dangerously domestic. "You cook," she observed, tasting bulgogi that rivaled anything she'd served at the restaurant. "My grandmother's recipe," he replied. She insisted that a man who couldn't feed his family was no man at all. It was the first truly personal thing he'd shared, and it transformed him momentarily from dangerous crime boss to someone's grandson who remembered lessons learned in a warm kitchen. "Tell me about her," Zara said. Jae-hyun was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "She raised 4 sons and 2 daughters after my grandfather died young. Built a small restaurant in Busan into an empire through sheer force of will and perfect kimchi. She taught me that power without purpose is just destruction." He refilled her wine glass with the careful attention of someone who understood hospitality as an art form. "She also taught me that family is everything," he continued. "That you protect what matters, regardless of cost. That loyalty freely given is worth more than loyalty bought with fear." The words hung between them like a confession. For a moment, she glimpsed the man beneath the armor, someone who carried the weight of inherited obligations and impossible expectations. "What about you?" he asked. "What would your family say about your current situation?" "My mother would say I'm finally living up to my potential," Zara replied with dark humor. "She never understood why I left the military for civilian life." Marcus would probably try to analyze the psychological implications of my career choices and recommend therapy. She took a sip of wine, surprised by how easily conversation flowed between them when the barriers came down. "And your father," Jae-hyun prompted gently. "Would say I should have shot first and asked questions later," she finished. "He was career Army. Died in Afghanistan when Marcus was 12. Sometimes I think joining up was my way of trying to understand who he was." The admission surprised her. She rarely talked about her father, especially with strangers. But Jae-hyun didn't feel like a stranger anymore. Somewhere between the security briefing and shared dinner, he'd become something far more complicated and infinitely more dangerous to her peace of mind. When she looked up, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Intense, thoughtful, hungry in a way that had nothing to do with food. The attraction that had been simmering under professional courtesy finally surfaced, crackling between them like live electricity. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved, both recognizing the line they were approaching. Then his phone rang, shattering the moment with the harsh intrusion of business that couldn't wait. But as he answered the call in rapid Korean, his eyes never left her face, and Zara realized with growing alarm that she was beginning to care about this dangerous man far more than was safe for either of them. The business dinner unfolded with the choreographed precision of diplomatic theater. Hong Kong investors in tailored suits discussed market opportunities over courses that cost more than most people spend on groceries in a month. Zara positioned herself near the windows where she could monitor both the dining room and exterior approaches, her earpiece crackling softly with security updates. From her vantage point, she watched Jae-hyun conduct negotiations with the fluid grace of a master strategist. Every gesture was calculated, every pause deliberate. He spoke Mandarin with the same precision he used in English and Korean, shifting between languages as naturally as breathing. She was beginning to understand that Kim Jae-hyun was far more than the dangerous crime boss she'd initially assumed. This was a man who operated multinational businesses, spoke 4 languages fluently, and commanded respect in boardrooms from Seattle to Seoul. The evening passed without incident, but as guests departed with handshakes and business cards, Zara noticed the tension that settled across his shoulders like a familiar burden. "Successful meeting," she observed as the last investor disappeared into his waiting limousine. "Successful enough," Jae-hyun replied, loosening his tie with a gesture that seemed almost vulnerable in its exhaustion. "They'll want additional security guarantees before committing to the shipping routes we discussed. More security because of the restaurant incident," she guessed. He nodded grimly. "Word travels fast in our circles. Failed assassination attempts make investors nervous about the stability of their partnerships." They walked through the compound's elegantly lit corridors toward his private office. The space was a study in controlled power, dark wood, leather furniture, and windows that offered commanding views of the Sound. "I need to make some calls," he said, settling behind his desk. "There may be late-night developments that require my attention." Zara moved toward the door, but his voice stopped her. "Stay, please. If those developments materialize, I may need your tactical perspective." She settled into the chair across from his desk, watching as he conducted business in rapid Korean. Even without understanding the words, she could read the tension in his voice, the way his free hand clenched and relaxed against the desk surface. When he finally ended the call, the silence stretched between them like a taut wire. "Bad news?" she asked. "Complicated news," he replied, pouring himself scotch from a crystal decanter. The contractors who attacked the restaurant weren't freelancers. They were hired by the Zhang family out of Vancouver. The name meant nothing to her, but his expression suggested it should. "Competitors," she guessed. "Former business partners," he corrected. "We had disagreements about operational methods. They preferred a more aggressive approach to market expansion." She watched him swirl the amber liquid in his glass, noting how the overhead lighting cast shadows across the sharp planes of his face. "What kind of disagreements?" she asked. "The kind that end with innocent people getting hurt," he said quietly. "The Zhangs believe that fear is the most effective business tool. Burn down a competitor's warehouse, threaten their family members, make examples that discourage others from opposing you." His voice carried the weight of old anger, carefully controlled but still burning. "I prefer more sophisticated methods. Fear is temporary. Respect lasts longer and costs less to maintain." Zara found herself leaning forward, drawn by this glimpse into the moral framework that guided his choices. "So what happened between you?" Jaehyun was quiet for a long moment, staring into his glass as if searching for words he'd never spoken aloud. 3 years ago, we were bidding on the same shipping contract. High-value electronics, very lucrative. The Zhangs decided to eliminate the competition by targeting the families of dock workers who might testify about irregularities in their cargo handling. His jaw tightened with the memory. One of those families was Korean. Recent immigrants, working 3 jobs between them to get established. They had a daughter, maybe 8 years old. The Zhangs sent men to their apartment to deliver a message about cooperation. Zara felt ice forming in her stomach. "What kind of message?" "The kind that leaves scars," he said simply. "Physical and otherwise." The little girl still won't speak to strangers. The weight of his words settled between them. She was beginning to understand that his war with the Zhang family wasn't just about business or territory. It was about the kind of man he refused to become. "I intervened," he continued, "protected the family, relocated them, made sure the daughter got the counseling she needed. The Zhangs never forgave what they saw as interference in their methods. And now they're trying to eliminate you," she said. "Now they're trying to eliminate me," he confirmed, "along with anyone who might stand in their way. Which, as of 2 nights ago, includes you." The casual mention of her own danger should have been terrifying, but instead she felt something else entirely. A growing certainty that this man's protection meant more than just physical safety. "There's something else," she said suddenly, pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. "The discharge from your military record. The incident in Kandahar." His head snapped up, dark eyes focusing on her with laser intensity. "How do you know about Kandahar?" "Because 3 years ago I was there," she said quietly. "Forward Operating Base Chapman. Our unit was providing security for a diplomatic convoy when we came across Zhang family contractors executing Korean aid workers." The silence that followed was deafening. Jaehyun set down his glass with deliberate care, his full attention fixed on her face. "The family you protected," Zara continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Part family. Humanitarian workers building schools in remote villages. They were gunned down because they witnessed Zhang operatives moving weapons through relief supply routes." She watched recognition dawn in his eyes like sunrise over water. "You were the American soldier who defied orders to protect the survivors," he said, his voice thick with something she couldn't identify. "My commanding officer said we couldn't risk international incident over civilian casualties," she replied. "Said we had bigger strategic objectives than saving a few aid workers. I told them to go to hell and did my job anyway. For a moment, neither of them moved. The revelation hung between them like a bridge connecting past and present. Two souls who had found each other across years and continents through shared moral conviction. "The Parks," Jaehyun said finally. "They're my cousins. Distant family, but family nonetheless. I spent months trying to discover who had saved them, who had risked everything to protect strangers from my country." Zara felt the world shift around her, realigning into patterns she hadn't seen coming. "And I've spent 3 years trying to forget that sometimes doing the right thing costs everything you thought you wanted," she whispered. He rose from his chair and moved around the desk with predatory grace, stopping close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You saved my family," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Long before you saved my life. Long before you knew my name or cared about my survival." She looked up to find his face closer than she'd expected, close enough to see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, close enough to catch the subtle scent that seemed to define him. "I couldn't let them die," she said simply. "Not when I had the power to prevent it." "And I couldn't let you remain unprotected," he replied, his hand rising to trace the line of her jaw with fingertips that trembled slightly. "Not when protecting you feels like the most important mission I've ever undertaken." The air between them crackled with electricity that had been building since the moment she'd thrown herself between him and a bullet. Professional distance collapsed under the weight of shared history and undeniable attraction. "This is complicated," she whispered, even as she leaned into his touch. "Everything worthwhile is complicated," he replied, his thumb brushing across her lower lip with reverent care. When he kissed her, it was with the controlled intensity she was learning to associate with everything Kim Jae-hyun did. Thorough, possessive, gentle enough to give her time to retreat, demanding enough to make retreat impossible. She tasted scotch and danger and something that might have been hope. Her hands found the solid warmth of his chest, feeling the rapid rhythm of his heartbeat beneath expensive cotton. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. The careful professional distance they'd maintained for days had shattered completely, leaving them staring at each other across a chasm of possibility and peril. His phone rang, harsh and insistent in the charged silence. For a moment, he ignored it completely, his gaze locked on her face as if memorizing every detail. Then reality reasserted itself with the relentless demands of a world that didn't care about stolen moments or forbidden attraction. He answered in Korean, his voice sharp with authority despite the lingering heat in his eyes. The conversation was brief, clipped, urgent. When he hung up, his expression had shifted from desire to deadly focus. "What is it?" she asked, though she already knew the answer would change everything. "The Zhongs just hit one of our warehouses," he said, his voice carrying the cold promise of retribution. "They've escalated beyond assassination attempts. This is war now." As he reached for his jacket and the weapons concealed within it, Zara realized that their moment of connection had just been shattered by forces that wouldn't rest until one side or the other was completely destroyed. And for the first time since accepting his protection, she understood that she wasn't just his asset anymore. She was his partner in whatever came next. The warehouse had burned for 6 hours before the Seattle Fire Department could contain the blaze. $20 million in legitimate electronics reduced to smoke and ash, but Jae-hyun's attention was fixed on the surveillance footage playing across his office monitors. The attack had been too precise, too coordinated. The Zhang operatives had known exactly which warehouse to hit, exactly when security would be lightest, exactly how to disable the fire suppression systems. Someone inside his organization had provided intelligence. Zara studied the feeds with professional intensity, her mind cataloging details that others might miss. "There," she said, pointing to timestamp 17 minutes before the explosion. Van parked across the street for exactly 12 minutes. Driver stays behind the wheel, engine running. That's overwatch, not reconnaissance. She rewound the footage, tracking movement patterns with the practiced eye of someone who had hunted insurgents through hostile territory. They had multiple teams: primary assault, secondary extraction, mobile command post 3 blocks away coordinating communications. This wasn't terrorism, it was military precision. Jaehyun's jaw tightened as the implications sank in. The Zhangs had access to former Special Forces operators, the kind of professionals who turned urban warfare into an art form. His phone buzzed with an encrypted message. As he read the contents, his expression shifted from anger to something far more dangerous. "Marcus's hospital," he said quietly. "They just received a bomb threat. Anonymous tip claiming explosives were planted in the oncology wing." Ice flooded Zara's veins. "They're using him as bait," she said, already moving toward the door. Jaehyun caught her arm with gentle but implacable strength. "It's a trap. They want you emotional, reactive, making mistakes. The moment you leave this compound, you become vulnerable." "I won't let them use my brother as leverage," she replied, steel threading through her voice. "Neither will I," he said firmly. "But we handle this intelligently." Park is already en route with a full security team. The hospital is being evacuated as we speak. Marcus will be relocated to the medical facility here within the hour. Before she could respond, the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in 3 seconds later, bathing the office in red light that turned everything ominous. In the distance, she could hear the compound's alarm system beginning its measured warning tone. Jaehyun was already moving, pulling weapons from concealed locations with the fluid efficiency of someone who had prepared for this moment. "Coordinated assault," he said, handing her a tactical vest and sidearm. "They hit the warehouse to draw our attention, threatened Marcus to scatter our resources, and now they're coming for us directly." Zara strapped on the vest and checked the weapons action with movements made automatic by years of training. "How many men do you have on compound?" she asked. 12 security personnel, plus household staff," he replied, speaking rapidly into his radio in Korean. "But half our team was deployed to the warehouse and hospital. We're outnumbered." The security monitors flickered back online, revealing dark figures scaling the perimeter walls with professional efficiency. Too many figures. Too well equipped. 24 hostiles, she counted grimly. Full tactical gear, night vision, coordinated breach points. This isn't a raid, it's an invasion. Jaehyun finished his radio communications and turned to face her, his expression carrying the focused calm of someone who had survived similar situations before. "There's a secure bunker beneath the medical facility," he said. "Reinforced steel, independent power supply, communication systems. You need to get there and coordinate our defense while I organize the response teams." She stared at him as if he'd suggested she sprout wings and fly. "You want me to hide in a bunker while you fight a war above my head? I want you to use your tactical expertise to keep us all alive," he replied with brutal honesty. "You see patterns that I miss, strategies that my men wouldn't consider. I need your mind focused on the big picture, not risking your life in close-quarters combat." The compound shuddered as something exploded near the eastern wall. Through the windows, she could see muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like deadly fireflies. "Go," he commanded, pressing a radio into her hands. "Channel 7 for security team. Channel 3 for direct communication with me." For a moment, they stared at each other across the space that separated them, both understanding that this might be the last time they spoke. Then Zara rose on her toes and kissed him with fierce intensity, pouring everything she couldn't say into the connection between them. "Don't you dare die on me, Kim Jae-hyun," she whispered against his lips. His smile was sharp as a blade and twice as dangerous. "I have too much to live for now," he replied. The bunker was everything he'd promised, a command center that would make Pentagon planners envious. Zara settled in front of the tactical displays and began coordinating the defense with the cold precision of someone who had done this before under far worse conditions. "Security Team Alpha," she spoke into the radio, "take positions on the north corridor. Don't engage directly, just slow their advance and force them into the central courtyard where Team Beta has overlapping fields of fire." The response crackled back in accented English. Roger. Alpha moving to position. She tracked the battle across multiple screens, watching Jaehyun's men execute defensive maneuvers with a disciplined efficiency of professional soldiers. But the attackers were professionals too, and they had numbers on their side. Team Beta, she called out as hostiles approached the main building. You have 6 tangos approaching from the west. Recommend suppressing fire to keep them pinned while Alpha repositions for flanking maneuver. The compound had become a killing ground, with both sides utilizing cover and concealment in a deadly game of tactical chess. But Zara could see the inevitable outcome playing out across her screens. Jaehyun, she called over Channel 3. You're going to be overrun in approximately 8 minutes. They're using classic hammer and anvil tactics, and you don't have enough men to prevent encirclement. His voice came back steady despite the gunfire she could hear in the background. Options. Fall back to secondary defensive positions around the medical facility, she replied. Shorter perimeter, better fields of fire, and it puts you closer to my position if things go badly. Acknowledged. All teams, execute tactical withdrawal to medical facility perimeter. Stay in pairs. Watch your 6. But as she watched the security feeds, Zara realized they had missed something crucial. A team of hostiles had bypassed the main battle entirely and was approaching the medical facility from an unexpected vector. The same medical facility where she was supposed to be safely hidden. Marcus was still en route with the evacuation team. If the attackers secured the medical facility, they would have both siblings as leverage against Jaehyun. She looked at the bunker's reinforced door, then at the tactical gear hung on nearby wall mounts. The smart thing was to stay hidden, coordinate from safety, trust others to handle the close-quarters fighting. But Zara Williams had never been particularly good at doing the smart thing when people she cared about were in danger. She grabbed an assault rifle and extra ammunition, keyed her radio to Channel 3. Jaehyun, she said, checking the weapons chamber. 6 hostiles approaching medical facility from the south. I'm moving to intercept. Negative, his voice came back immediately. Stay in the bunker. That's an order. Since when do I take orders from you? She replied, already moving toward the door. Since you became too important to lose, he responded, and the raw emotion in his voice stopped her cold. For a moment, the professional distance they'd maintained dissolved completely, leaving only the truth of what they meant to each other. I'll be careful, she promised. You'd better be, he replied. Because if anything happens to you, I'm going to burn the entire Zhang family to the ground and salt the earth where they stood. The medical facility corridors were dark except for emergency lighting that cast everything in hellish red. Zara moved with the ghost-quiet steps of someone who had hunted human predators through hostile territory, every sense heightened to combat sharpness. She could hear them before she saw them. The careful whisper of tactical boots on polished floors, the soft click of weapons being readied for assault. The first hostile never saw her coming. She took him down with a knife to the throat, catching his body before it could hit the ground and alert his teammates. The second man rounded the corner just as she was dragging the body into a supply closet. For a split second, they stared at each other in mutual surprise. Then training took over for both of them. He brought his weapon up fast, but she was faster. Her rifle barked twice, controlled pairs to center mass. He dropped without firing a shot. For more, she thought grimly, tracking their movement through a mental map of the facility. The ambush came as she approached Marcus's designated room. 3 men, positioned to catch her in a crossfire that would have been lethal if she hadn't spent 2 tours learning to read terrain like scripture. She went low and left, rolling behind a nurse's station as automatic weapons fire-chewed chunks out of the wall where she'd been standing. Return fire came in measured bursts, conserving ammunition while keeping them pinned down. This was what she'd been born for. Not serving overpriced Korean food to ungrateful customers, but this moment where life and death balanced on the edge of perfect violence. The fight was brief, vicious, and decisive. When the smoke cleared, Zara stood alone among bodies that would never threaten anyone again. Her radio crackled with Jaehyun's voice. Zara, status report. Medical facility secure, she replied, breathing hard. 6 hostiles neutralized. No casualties on our side. The relief in his voice was palpable. Marcus's transport just arrived. He's safe. But their moment of triumph was interrupted by new intelligence crackling over the security channel. Boss, one of his men reported urgently. We've got movement on the main house. Looks like Zhang himself just arrived with reinforcements. This just became personal. Through the medical facility windows, Zara could see additional vehicles pouring through the shattered main gate. The real battle was just beginning. And for the first time since accepting Jaehyun's protection, she realized that she wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for the future they might have together. Zhang Weiming stepped through the shattered remains of the main gate like a conqueror surveying captured territory. Even in tactical gear, he carried himself with the arrogant bearing of someone who had never learned to fear consequences. Behind him, 24 fresh operators moved with professional precision, surrounding the compound with overwhelming force. Zara watched through the medical facility's security feeds as Jaehyun emerged from the main house to meet his enemy in the central courtyard. Even outnumbered 5-1, he moved with the controlled grace of a predator who had chosen his battleground carefully. The two men faced each other across 20 feet of manicured lawn that had been torn apart by gunfire and grenades. In the harsh glare of emergency lighting, they looked like generals from opposing armies, each representing a different philosophy of power. You should have stayed dead 3 years ago, Zhang called out in accented English, his voice carrying the satisfied tone of someone who believed victory was inevitable. And you should have learned when to stop, Jaehyun replied calmly. But some lessons require more permanent teaching methods. Zhang's laugh was ugly, cutting through the night air like broken glass. Look around you, Kim. Your compound is in ruins. Your men are dead or scattered. The woman who saved you is trapped in that medical facility with nowhere to run. This ends tonight. Through her radio earpiece, Zara heard Jaehyun's voice on their private channel, barely audible over the standoff. Whatever happens next, stay in the facility. Zhang will try to use you as leverage. Like hell, she whispered back, already moving toward the facility's rear exit. The conversation in the courtyard continued, but Zara was no longer listening. She had identified Zhang's tactical weakness, his arrogance. He had positioned his men to contain and intimidate, not to watch for flanking maneuvers from unexpected directions. She keyed her radio to the security channel. All teams, she said quietly. In 60 seconds, I'm going to provide a distraction. When I do, hit them from every angle simultaneously. No merci, no prisoners. The acknowledgments came back swift and professional. Jaehyun's surviving men were ready to die for their boss, but more importantly, they were ready to kill for him. Zara slipped out of the medical facility like smoke, using shadows and architectural cover to approach the courtyard from an angle that put her behind Zhang's personal security detail. The rifle she carried had been selected for precision, not volume of fire. In the courtyard, negotiations had devolved into mutual threats. You killed innocent people, Jaehyun said, his voice carrying the cold promise of retribution. That little girl you terrorized still has nightmares. Her parents still flinch when strangers knock on their door. Some debts can only be paid in blood. Zhang's response was to gesture to his men. 2 operators stepped forward, weapons trained on Jaehyun's chest. The message was clear: submit or die. That was when Zara opened fire. Her first shot took out Zhang's communications specialist, eliminating coordination between his scattered teams. The second shot shattered the spotlight that had been illuminating the courtyard, plunging the area into tactical darkness. All teams, execute, she commanded over the radio. The compound erupted into coordinated violence as Jaehyun's men emerged from concealment with synchronized precision. What had looked like defeat became a carefully orchestrated counterattack that turned Zhang's numerical advantage into a liability. In the chaos that followed, Zara moved through the darkness like an avenging angel. Years of night fighting in Afghanistan had taught her to see in conditions where others became blind and helpless. She eliminated targets with the cold efficiency of someone who understood that mercy was a luxury reserved for peacetime. The battle lasted 8 minutes. When the gunfire finally stopped, Zhang's invasion force had been systematically destroyed by defenders who fought with the desperate fury of people protecting their home. Zhang himself stood alone in the center of the courtyard, his weapon empty, his men dead around him. Blood ran from a dozen minor wounds, but he remained upright through sheer force of will. Jaehyun approached slowly, his pistol trained on the man who had terrorized his family and threatened everyone he cared about. "This is for the parks," he said quietly. "For every innocent person you hurt to make your point." The single gunshot echoed across the compound like a period at the end of a long, violent sentence. When the silence returned, Zara emerged from the shadows to find Jaehyun standing over Zhang's body with an expression that mixed satisfaction with exhaustion. "It's over," she said simply. He looked up at her approach, and something in his eyes made her chest tighten with emotion she couldn't name. "Not quite," he replied, holstering his weapon. "There's still the matter of what happens next." 3 days later, Zara sat in the compound's restored library, watching Marcus argue enthusiastically with Dr. Patel about experimental cancer treatments that might revolutionize oncology. Her brother's color had improved dramatically, and his latest tests showed no detectable cancer cells. The compound had been rebuilt with efficiency that bordered on miraculous. New security systems, reinforced structures, and staff who moved with the quiet competence of people who had survived a war together. Jaehyun found her there as evening shadows stretched across polished floors. "How is he?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. "Dr. Patel says complete remission is likely within 6 months," she replied. "Marcus is already talking about returning to school, maybe changing his major to oncology research." They watched her brother gesture animatedly at medical charts, his passion for learning evident in every movement. "There's something we need to discuss," Jaehyun said quietly. Zara's stomach tightened. She had been expecting this conversation since the threat ended, dreading the moment when he would explain that her usefulness had expired. "The original arrangement between us," he continued, pulling an envelope from his jacket. "The protection contract, the financial obligations, the terms that bound you to this compound." He handed her the envelope with careful formality. "I'm dissolving it completely. You're free to leave whenever you choose. Marcus's medical care will continue regardless, along with his education funding. You owe me nothing." Zara stared at the envelope containing her freedom, feeling something that should have been relief, but wasn't. "And if I choose to stay," she asked. "Then we need to discuss new terms," he replied, his voice carrying undertones she couldn't quite identify. "I have a business proposition for you." From his other pocket, he produced a second envelope, this one bearing the letterhead of his legitimate import-export company. "Security consultant," he explained. "Full partner in defensive operations, tactical planning, and personnel training. Salary commensurate with your expertise, complete autonomy in security decisions, and authority to override my orders if you identify threats I miss." She opened the envelope and found a contract that offered more money than she had imagined possible, along with responsibilities that would challenge every skill she possessed. "This is a real job," she said, surprised by the professional structure of the offer. "A real partnership," he confirmed. "I learned something important during the attack. Fighting beside you felt more natural than fighting alone ever did. I don't want to go back to managing threats by myself." The offer was everything she could have wanted professionally, but she found herself searching his face for something that wasn't written in contracts or salary figures. "What about the other part?" she asked quietly. "The part that has nothing to do with business arrangements." Jaehyun was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face with the intensity she had learned to associate with important decisions. "I was hoping," he said finally, "that you might be willing to consider a different kind of partnership as well." From his jacket, he produced a small velvet box that made her heart skip several beats. "Korean tradition requires certain formalities," he continued, opening the box to reveal a ring that somehow managed to be both elegant and understated. "But American traditions matter too, and I want to honor both." The ring was perfect, platinum band with a single diamond that caught the library's warm lighting and threw it back in brilliant fragments. "Marry me," he said simply, "not because of contracts or protection arrangements or business partnerships. Marry me because 3 days ago I realized that losing you would be worse than dying. Marry me because you see honor in a world that taught me to expect betrayal. Marry me because when you fight beside me, I finally understand what my grandmother meant about family being everything." Zara looked at the ring, then at his face, then at Marcus, who was still arguing passionately about medical research with someone who had become more like family than doctor. "What about your world?" she asked. "The danger, the violence, the constant threat of people like Jean." "We'll face it together," he replied. "Your tactical expertise, my resources, both our commitment to protecting what matters. No more separation between professional and personal. No more pretending we're anything less than partners in everything." She thought about the restaurant where they had met, about the split-second decision to throw herself between him and a bullet. Every choice since that moment had led them here, to this library, to this offer of a future built on mutual respect and hard-won trust. "Yes," she said simply, extending her hand so he could slide the ring on her finger. The fit was perfect, just like everything else he had planned with meticulous attention to detail. When he kissed her, it was with the controlled passion she had learned to expect from Kim Jae-yeon. Thorough, possessive, gentle enough to melt her resistance, and demanding enough to ignite fires she hadn't known she carried. "I have one condition," she murmured against his lips. "Name it," he replied immediately. "Marcus never finds out about the really dangerous parts. He gets to believe his sister married a successful businessman who happens to take security very seriously." Jaehyun's smile was warm enough to light the entire room. "Agreed," he said, though he might wonder why we have such excellent medical insurance. 6 months later, Zara Williams Kim stood in the compound's renovated garden, wearing a hanbok that had belonged to Jaehyun's grandmother and watching her husband conduct business with visiting investors. The traditional Korean wedding ceremony had been followed by an American reception that lasted until dawn, celebrating the union of two people who had found each other through violence and chosen each other through love. Marcus, now officially in remission and thriving in his advanced oncology research program, served as unofficial ambassador between his sister's new family and the academic world that didn't need to know exactly how successful Kim Jae-hyun's business ventures really were. The compound had become something she had never expected. Home. Not just a place where she felt safe, but a place where she belonged, where her skills were valued, where the man she loved looked at her every morning as if she were the most remarkable thing he had ever discovered. As she watched him shake hands with Korean businessmen who spoke in the formal tones of legitimate commerce, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought them together. A single moment of violence had revealed who they both really were beneath the masks they wore for the world. She was no longer a waitress hiding her military training, and he was no longer a dangerous man walking through life alone. They were partners in the truest sense. Two people who had chosen each other from positions of strength and committed to facing whatever came next as a united force. The story of how they found each other might have started with bullets and blood, but it had evolved into something far more powerful. It had become a love worth fighting for. I'd love to hear what you thought of Zara and Jaehyun's story. Did their journey from that first collision to choosing each other feel authentic to you? Have you ever had a moment where danger revealed who you really were underneath? Share your thoughts in the comments about what this story meant to you.